started to
Okay,
record.
sounds good.
Sounds good.
Is the does the audio sound okay?
It sounds, yeah, very good.
Okay, good. All right, sounds good. How are you?
I'm good. I have been, yeah, pretty well. I have started training after a couple of weeks of off season where I didn't do much, but now,
Yeah.
yeah, back to training and
Okay.
even if like no races on the calendar, but I have realized how like I don't need to have a race in the calendar
Yeah.
to train hard and to train like not hard but just to train well and to put in the
Yeah,
hours
just
and to you know do the
yeah.
do your own thing. I just enjoy the process and it's been good. I don't think that happens very
Exactly.
often
Yeah, I think
because you just go from one race to another and you don't even take the time to to appreciate and to enjoy just running or whatever you're doing outside. So
yeah.
it's been good. What about
Good,
you?
good. Yeah, it's been kind of a funny fall in a way, but um yeah, I think I mentioned to you, I was having some trouble with I've been having some trouble with my knee, so that kind of
Yeah.
like but I'm starting to build up. I'm still having some trouble with my knee. I'm trying to decide or arrange what to do about it. I haven't decided for certain yet, but I may actually get like a little. I may get like a more minor, uh, sur I guess surgery, like a more minor surgery done to clean out my knee, to do a scope on my knee to take out there's some what they would call like floaters in my knee,
Is it
pieces of
for like overuse or what is it? What is it?
my right knee is sort of misaligned a little bit, like my right kneecap. I don't know if I've had that all my life or if I had an injury at some point that shifted it. I'm not sure how it, but anyways, my right knee is a little shifted to the lateral side, to the outside. So I think probably like over time that knee was probably just the wear pattern on it. Like the like with how it glides across the cartilage. It was probably it was loaded up more heavily on the lateral side. So it probably just was a lot more wear and sort of like more aggressive wear on that side than normal. So probably just like, I mean, I don't really know, but like I'd assume just like the years of training just kind of took its toll on it. So I have there's some like pieces of, I guess cartilage can like sometimes pieces break off. And so I have some that are floating around in there. So I've been talking to a doctor about going in and getting them removed. Um, so yeah, because it's like my knee kind of catches sometimes. Not so much like maybe some while I'm running, probably more just like while I'm like doing normal things or when I'm like in bed or something. Um, but I mean, I do have pain while running. But anyways, he thinks that maybe if we go in there and take some of the stuff out, it may help. And the thing is, it's a pretty low key surgery. It's like I think it's like arthroscopic or whatever. I think you're like out the same day. Um,
Not too bad.
they're yeah, it's like it sounds like it's pretty low key. Like he said, like I've heard people say it's like 1 to 2 weeks recovery. He said more like a month, but I think his was maybe more of like maybe like a month till I'm really kind of like back in my like where I'm like, okay, I'm like back to basically normal activity again. Where I think maybe the 1 to 2 weeks was maybe people who are more like, oh yeah, you can like walk and bike and run within 2 weeks, but maybe it's a very small amount or whatever. So I don't know. So anyways, I'm thinking about getting that done. Um,
Good.
it'd be nice to get it done this year yet, like in like
Before
the
before 2025.
in yeah, it'd be nice to get it done in December so that then by like January I basically just have the whole year.
Yeah.
Um, I have like been slowly I've been working with the knee and I've been slowly building up my volume again and starting to mix in skiing as well, which has been nice because I can get more because then I get pretty easily get more training hours because I do like a session on skis and then a session running, and that's been pretty good. So I actually think I've sort of have a, like I'm not like at peak fitness or anything, but I have some decent fitness. So if I just have some decent fitness and then get the procedure done and it's like a month or so, I think I should be in pretty good shape um, to train for next year's goals and things.
You already have
So,
any
but
goal?
yeah, that's been well, I put my name back in the Hard Rock lottery. Um, and that's actually been a little hard because
Do you think they'll
it
keep
sort
your
of
spot for like that you had this year that you
yeah,
couldn't?
so there's no
No
like
guarantee.
yeah, people keep asking this. So there's no guarantee like there's no I don't think there's like no deferral process for what happened to me. Like there's no with the rules of that race, I don't think there isn't any like policy for like, oh, if you drop out the week of due to injury, you can get an injury deferral for the next year. I don't think there's anything like that. There's just like there's policies for like expecting parents, like mothers and fathers, deferrals for that. But I don't think there's like just like a general injury deferral. So I have no like, and there's no like, yeah, there's no like rollover from last year. I do know that, and I've spoken with Dale, and I know that he has like a strong desire to see me do the race, and he's the one that picks the three men and the three women that get in, um, outside of the traditional lottery. But there's no like deferral. So I just put my name in like anyone else and see what happens. It's a little hard though because it seemed like the natural race to put in for next year because I didn't get to do it last year and then it's also World Championships year, so UTMB is like a little tough because it's like so close to Worlds. So Hard Rock seemed to make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Um, but then and the other thing was with my knee, I was like, well, it's kind of the if I can get selected for Hard Rock, then I'm like taken care of, and I can just take care of my knee, and I have a long period of time. Like I don't have to worry about like doing a UTMB qualifier
Exactly.
or doing a Western States qualifier or something like that. So that was the one nice thing was like I'll know in December whether I'm in or I'm out. And then if I'm in, I can just make sure do everything I can to try to get my knee ready. Um, but it's hard because Western States is starting to look so there's so much drama unfolding. Everybody's just, I guess, they're already starting to hype it up of like, oh, it might be these people, it might be that. But then I'm also like, yeah, but it also might not. Like, we don't know who's going to stay healthy or who's going to get those golden tickets. I mean, certainly, I think Killian and Vincent have a good shot at getting those tickets in Italy, but you never know. But it is shaping up to be like a potentially very epic year at Western, and I'm like, oh man, it'd be fun to be in
Be
that
in the
race.
game.
Yeah, but I'd have to get in. But I am pretty seriously though, if my knee does well enough this winter and into the spring, I am pretty seriously considering going out and maybe racing Canyons 100K though. Um, partly um, it's kind of like it just ticks a lot of boxes. It will probably be a competitive race, which is generally what we always look for. And then,
Not everybody,
um,
but
yeah, yeah,
I guess the serious athletes, yes.
yeah, oh yeah, I guess yeah. I mean, I like a
I mean,
competitive,
I
but
think there is
it,
some
but
people that tend to hide a little bit,
yeah,
but
yeah,
then
yeah. It depends on, yeah, yeah. I usually like,
competition is so exciting. Like I cannot like think about myself
well, and it's
as
just,
a pro athlete without
yeah.
confronting with the best of the
I
sport.
mean, yeah, my most proud of moments in the sport are the races where I showed up, where all the other really good guys showed up and then had a good race, and then I had a good race, It
For
just
sure.
means so much more when the competition is there. Um, if the competition is not there, it's like, well, maybe I had a great race, but there's not really a whole lot of comparison. So, um, yeah, well, and it's just exciting like that. Those are the races everyone's watching, and there's so much good energy, and I like that.
Do you like the
So,
drama around races? Like, for example, the fact
uh,
that a lot of people are hyping up Western State and, Vonson
yeah,
and Killian are
yeah,
trying a Western State qualifier. David Roche is looking like potentially to be a
yeah,
top contender, and everyone is talking about it,
yeah,
and,
yeah.
discussion
I
on free
mean,
trail, single track, and all of that.
probably yes and no. Like,
What,
in some way,
what do you
like
think?
I like when things are exciting and people get excited. Like, oh, it's a competitive field. We can't wait to watch this race. Sometimes if it goes a little too dramatic with like, I don't know, and that's just a personal thing for me. Like, probably it can reach a point where I'm like, okay, this is just getting a little silly, or like this is a lot of stuff we don't really know. Like, it's like I think I tend to be like a well, let's wait and see guy. Like I'm fine with people getting excited, but sometimes people will be like, oh, I think so and so is totally gonna win. They're gonna smash it. They're gonna get the course record. And I'm like, especially when it's someone who maybe hasn't done that race before or hasn't raced that distance before, it's always like, sure, I'll give him a shot. Like, I'll be like, yeah, they may do it. They might make, like, get the record and run the greatest performance of all time. But I'll also just be like, but let's wait and see, because it's just too high. Like Eli Hemming at JFK. Like, I think most people in tune with the sport thought that there was a good chance the record was going down last weekend, and then it was going to be Eli,
Yeah,
and then it was stinking David Sinclair, who's a really good athlete, right? But I feel like
so
nobody,
good.
like, not many people were calling David Sinclair. It's just like, he's a really good athlete, but he kind of like, he's not at the front of everybody's mind, I don't think, and he's like, he's a little maybe more in that 50K and down range. I don't know. I don't follow his career like super closely, I guess, but he's just kind of like, um he's not like a constant like 50 mile, 100K, 100 mile guy. He's sort of like, he's maybe a little more well-rounded, which is also maybe why he did so well at JFK. um but anyways, it was just like, yeah, with Eli it was just like, yeah, he's been smashing kind of everything. He could knock that out of the park, but it was also just like, but we also just don't know. Like,
Yeah.
anytime someone's going into a territory like that's like the farthest they've ever run or whatever, it's like, oh, we just don't know, so we just have to wait and see. So if there gets to be a ton of hype, of like sort of confident hype of like, oh, so and so is going to win or whatever, I'm like, yeah, yeah, like, it's okay to be excited, but like, let's just wait and see what happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes the drama is a bit much for me, I think, but I guess it's kind of, I don't know, maybe it's good for the sport. It gets people excited. I think the
I,
excitement surrounding Western states next year is generally a good thing. Like, it
yeah.
makes me excited. Like, I'm like, man, I kind of like when I saw Vincent, them speculating about Vincent this year or this week, I was like, ah, shoot, like, you know, in my brain, I'm a little bit like, maybe I should tell Dale to take my name out of the lottery for Hard Rock. But I, yeah, but like I said, I, I'm seriously thinking about going to canyons. It ticks a lot of boxes because if my knee, if I get into Hard Rock but my knee doesn't cooperate, I think because I think it's kind of like the up down that my knee probably struggles with more than like the flatter runnable stuff. So I was like, well, if I can't get my knee wrangled for Hard Rock, it might my knee might do decent at like Western States on that profile of a course. So I was like, well, and it looks super exciting. So I was like, it wouldn't really hurt to go to Canyons 100K, and if I'd have a good day, you could have a golden ticket and you could have a UTMB qualifier and you'd be in probably a competitive race. And so it just ticks a lot of boxes. And I'm just kind of like, well, any way you cut it there, it's kind of a valuable race to be in. Um, so, and if we got a big snow year, like the snow this year has started off pretty strong in the U.S. So if we get a huge snow year, some every now and then they cancel Hard Rock. Um, so it also gives me, if I could have a good race at Canyons, it'd give me a backup plan in case Hard Rock got canceled. Um, but yeah, I don't know. At this point, I don't know if I'll actually go to Canyons, but it's just a thought of like, hey, that I could like if I could have a good day there, and no guarantee I would. It's sort of like probably a little strays a little different than not stuff I've done in my career, but it's just stuff I've been focusing on recently. Um, but if I could have a good day, it's like I could sort of check off a lot of things and give myself some good options. Um,
Yeah, for
so
sure.
yeah, we'll see. And I'm definitely interested in Worlds at the end of the year in September.
What
Um,
place do you think Worlds has in the current competition, international competition scene with, UTMB, uh, obviously Hard Rock, Western State, but also Golden Trail. I mean, I think it's hard to find a place for Worlds. Um,
mhm.
Probably since Thailand, the event has been growing and getting more attention, which has been really good, I
Yeah.
think. But how do you see the event within the context of those other huge, big circuits and events?
Yeah, well,
Also, how
I
do you
think
see
the
the? I mean, I obviously I don't think the calendar particularly favor the athletes because
uh-huh.
I mean just 4 weeks between UTMB and Worlds is it's not good. It's not good for the sport. It's not good for the
Uh-huh.
athletes. It's not good for UTMB, but also for World. So everyone is basically
Yeah,
losing, and I don't
it's
understand why they're not talking to each other to find
it
a compromise
yeah,
or whatever.
it's curious to me why the close spacing this year. I mean, in Austria a few years ago, um I think that worked pretty well in that it was early and then UTMB was late, but I mean, I guess it was kind of close. I guess it was close to Western. So you could argue that it's hard to put these days, there's so many races, it's hard to put anything where it doesn't compete with something else. But when you
Obviously,
look at big, the truly big competitive like world stage events, they're not like every weekend. There are only so many. So yeah, it is curious to me why so close. Why they didn't go. It's curious why they didn't maybe go like I think it's September. UTMB is basically end of August, and then this is like end of September, so it's like a month.
exactly.
It's curious to me why the organizations didn't decide to go like end of October, like I mean even October, just go like November or super early December, like we did in Thailand, I think was early December, which that sometimes I think is like, some people are just kind of shutting down and fried by that point. So you might get a lesser race out of people. Um, but still, like, if there's a point in the season where we kind of lack big competitive races where people are a little bit like, I don't know where to go. I feel like it's that end of season. It's that period of time, which now has basically come down to like JFK and Ultra Trail Cape Town in my mind. Those are like the main ones. I guess maybe Kodiak is starting to gain some ground, but like, it used to be North Face 50
Yeah.
in the US. Like if you were an American runner, everybody went to North Face 50. That's where everybody went. That was the big showdown. That was like the season ender. It was like we all race with whatever we have left, and
It
then
was
we
so
all
good.
go. Oh yeah, it was so fun. It was so perfect because it was right around the holidays. It
Would
was
have been
like,
perfect for me. Like I love those
yeah.
trails. I've run on those trails.
Oh yeah,
It's the like the perfect distance for me, and
I
yeah, would
wish you
have
would
been a
have
lot of
been
fun.
like, I wish you would have gotten to race that race in its heyday because it was like, I don't know, maybe I'm biased, but like it was phenomenal. And it was like, even just the timing of the year, it was like, it was right around the holidays. So you gave it one last go of everything you had left. And then you just, went home and like enjoyed
Mm.
Christmas
Yeah,
and
and
called it
then
a season. And
there is that 2016 video and battle with Hayden
oh,
that
with Hayden. Yeah.
became
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I mean,
a huge
I,
inspiration for me.
yeah. And like, like I say, I may be biased because I was fortunate to have like two really, really good years there and really three good years there. Um, and I mean, I raced it 4 years um, and three of them went quite well. And yeah, I love that race. And ever since it kind of disappeared, it semi exists still, but under new management. And and of course it's different and whatnot. But yeah, it's kind of left a little bit of a hole in that end of season. So would have been, in my mind, potentially a good spot for Worlds. But yeah, so I don't know what the placement, what the reasoning of putting Worlds so close to UTMB was. I don't, you could speculate about that. But yeah, it will be interesting this year to see where athletes put their attention. Back to your question of how do I view Worlds. Um, I think it's really come a long way. I mean, I've been running World Championship races since 2014. I think I ran, um, believe it or not, I ran like the traditional, like short distance, like up, down, like I guess what we now call classic.
Yeah,
Um, Back in the day when it was just like the mountain running team was just like, it was like a 11K or something.
yeah.
Believe it or not, in 2014, I was on that world championship team for the US. Um, and it was in Italy. And so I've been
Casate di
running
Massa.
on world champ. Yeah, probably up to the quarry. It was like a marble
Yeah,
quarry.
exactly.
Yeah, it was kind of weird,
Awesome.
but it was good. It was cool. Yeah, so I've been running on world championship teams since 2014. I don't think I've done every team every year, but like from then till like last year, I ran, or was it last year or the year before?
Yeah,
Yeah, it was
Innsbruck
last year,
23.
right?
Yeah,
Last year in Innsbruck, I ran again. And I would say it's come a long way. I think there sort of reorganization and restructuring of it in the past couple of years to bring everything together into one event, taking it more from like a single race event to more of kind of like an Olympics venue. Not in that we have like 100 sports or whatever, but we have like like four different disciplines of mountain running basically.
yeah,
Um, we have the vertical, the classic, the short, which is like a marathon, and then the long of 80K. I think it's really improved it. I think they've really made it like a good, like, from like one of the more competitive things of the year. Now the thing with it is it's only it's every other year. So, or it's every 2 years, right? So, that I think in one way is good because it gives I think that is maybe good for the athletes because it gives us the freedom to focus on other things in the off years, and really pour ourselves into things like Western States or UTMB or whatever. But I think in terms of if it wants to be the top dog event, it might, I don't know, it might cripple it a little because people just like get in that rhythm of like what happens every year. Like in cycling, what does everybody know? Well, everybody knows the Tour de France. It happens every year. They probably have, I don't know how cycling does it, but I don't know if they have a world championship event every year or every other, or say the Olympics. They have they're cycling in the Olympics, right? Like every 4 years, but it's like I feel like the Tour de France is way more known than the Olympic cycling. Sure, when people watch the Olympics, they think it's a big deal, but in terms of cycling, if you think cycling, you think the Tour de France. And so for us, like I think the things that happen every year for us are Western States, UTMB, Hard Rock, those things. So it's easy for like when people think trail running to think UTMB, and not necessarily World Championships. But I still think World Championships has gotten very competitive. Like I think sometimes it's actually maybe more competitive than people realize.
Yeah.
Um, Partly just because it doesn't have that hype, it doesn't really have that reputation and that hype. And you have to actually understand like the sport and the runners. You have to be like more in tune with the sport, I think, to understand how competitive World Championships was or wasn't. Than to just like because people look at UTMB and it has a lot of hype, it has a reputation, and it'll just be
Yeah,
like,
just because
oh you placed,
a
yeah,
competition is backed up by brands, it doesn't make it more
no,
competitive
exactly,
than another that is not. I mean,
exact,
or
yeah,
like obviously, yeah, there is a ton of media around UTMB, and historically, the World Championship hasn't been that much covered by a lot of media unless it's like this very like specialized trail
yeah,
media. But that doesn't mean that one is better than the other. I mean, that doesn't have anything to do with how competitive the race actually is. Then, of
yeah,
course, you have to give an incentive to athletes to compete in the world champs in those events. And I think it comes down to not just one factor. It's not just prize money or how popular the event is. You need to also, for example, work with brands and make sure there are bonuses for athletes to go to the world champs and perform.
yeah,
You need to find the right place in the calendar. I don't know, like the thing that you were mentioning about having it every other year. On one hand, it's a good thing. On the other hand, it leaves an empty that is going to be occupied by some other
by something
organization,
else, yeah.
something else. And so I don't know. It's a lot of things that need to be dialed in. And but yeah, the profile of the event has definitely grown. They have been doing a better job in marketing the event, filming, covering the event, and
Hmm.
and everything, and that's made it more attractive both for the athletes and the fans, I think.
And I think it's probably a very attractive and much easier thing to commit to on your calendar uh, for the sub ultra crew. And I could be wrong about that, but I just feel like, ultra we tend to be like very selective
Yeah,
about what we commit to because the efforts are like so because they're so long and so taxing on the body. But yeah, like I feel like it we've been getting high profile athletes like Grayson Murphy um at world championships, and I think that's great. And I think um yeah, I and I think probably the ultra side benefits from that some because by having it all together, even if like even if like the top names and if not all the top names in ultra show up, there's still excitement at the event because some of the top names showed up, but then also a lot of these top names in sub ultra did show up, and so it helps. It makes it feel more exciting and whatnot. Um, but yeah, I think last year in Innsbruck, um, I don't know how you felt, but I felt like it was very competitive,
Yes,
and
totally.
I feel like people lacked a scope of how competitive. Like I remember talking to Jason Koop about it, and him being like, it was really quite funny because he was like, I think he was kind of questioning how competitive it was. He was, and he I don't like I'm not trying to talk negatively of him here. I just remember it was very interesting because I think he was just kind of like almost like puzzled a little bit of like these guys that won, like I've never heard of them. Like, so was it competitive? And then I remember like asking Megan Hicks for her opinion, I think after he said that. And, because Megan, who works for Iron Far, has been involved in the sport for many, many years. She goes to pretty much, she goes to many of the big events. She's been watching races like for so long, interviewing, doing race coverage. And I asked her, and she was like, no, she's like, it was like super competitive. Like she thought that it was such a competitive race. And that was basically my take. I was out there racing and I didn't have my best day, but I had like or I wouldn't say I had my best day, but I had like a decent day. Um and I just remember being like where are these guys coming from? Like there's all these guys out here, like I don't even know who they are. Like I don't, like some of them I know who they are, like, but I think that's also the beauty of world championships is it just seems like people come out of the woodwork because these like I think some people struggle with the governing bodies of their country and they don't really like it and so they don't go to worlds. But then other countries it almost seems like they've got something going because it's like they just find these people that
I
I like
think,
don't even know exist and they show up at worlds and I'm like there's
yeah,
some like 20-year-old kid from like Czechoslovakia that I've never even heard of who's just like crushing.
I think it's
Um,
because these people a lot of times don't have the resources of possibilities to just to go to the events just because they don't have
uh-huh.
support by a brand. Like to just
Yeah.
go to UTMB, it takes
And
unless you're sponsored by a brand, it's a lot of
mm-hmm.
money. When you
Yeah.
go to a world championship, it's yeah, of course you would need to make the national team, but it's a lot more accessible because it's like even it's open to all federations. Like that's a
Yeah.
truly global event. But if you think about it, UTMB is very selective just because only a few people from, yeah, like mainly Europe and North America can afford to go to
Uh-huh.
UTMB or to go to Hard Rock or to go to Western
Mm-hmm.
States.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and that's where it's like that's where like I think what when we think about all of these things like oh what I don't know what races are big and like what's competitive and what do we like and do we like the hype and do we like that? But I think coming back to like, well, what's good for the sport and what do we want to promote? And I think the one thing, like the one really cool thing of the sport is like giving people opportunity and being able to have these races where like, oh man, that I've never heard of that guy in my life and he's really good, and that was like my start in the sport at like like I ran a few races before this, but like at JFK 50 was like,
exactly.
you know, a race director, just like, without much of a resume, gave me a bib and which I think I paid for the bib, but like it was probably it might, I don't know if the race was sold out or not, but like gives me a bib um last minute, and gives me a shot, and then it becomes something. And that's part of the beauty of the sport. That's part of the beauty of like that for the most part we still do like mass starts, um which I probably there could be just some discussion of, is there a place someday for just a pro start? But it's also like part of the beauty of the sport, and what's good for the sport in a way is the mass start, because the guy who nobody knows that qualified and signed up and is standing 20 rows deep at UTMB could win the whole race, and that's a beautiful thing. And so yeah, finding that support and stuff, if some of these big events and things, we can find ways to support athletes to get there, so that we're not just like at world championships where we're like, well, who was that guy from Finland that I've never heard of? You know what I mean? It's like, well, maybe his governing, maybe the organization from his country like helped support him to get there, and now we got to see him run on a world stage versus maybe just in tiny races in his home country all the time. um if we could do that same type of thing at races like Western and UTMB and stuff, and have qualifying processes and things that allow for people to have chances like that. It gets complicated, right? Because
Yeah.
it's easier said than done, and
Oh yeah.
there's kind of gotta be some rules, but like just like giving that, I like like just support to athletes who are, you know could make a name for themselves or whatever.
Yeah,
um
support to athletes who deserve, because at the end of the day, the top end of the sport, the elite side of the sport, is about performance, and like it doesn't require being sponsored or wearing a jersey that has a name of and a brand on it to run
yeah.
fast. You can do it with anything, and you can come from a country that you know like doesn't really count anything in the sport of trail running, but still be a top contender if you train hard. And once we are on that start line, we're all equal. So
Yeah.
I think that's a
Yeah.
beauty and something
Yeah.
we should try to like highlight and support. Just because it's not like sometimes I think we focus too much on the athletes, the people who have gained a reputation in the sport,
Hmm.
without giving credit to like new athletes, new names who may be coming and
Hmm.
running even faster. I think a good example of that was, I mean, you were in that race at Transgran Canaria last year, which
Hmm.
was won by Raul Butaci from Romania.
Yeah.
Just because it's a new name, it felt like the race was like had less value than
Uh-huh.
if it had been won by, say, a Jim Walmsley, you know.
Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
that's not true, because his performance was amazing, and
Yeah.
I think it deserved the same attention, the same recognition that if the race had been won by another big name of our sport. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like, well, I think that kind of comes back to like being knowledgeable enough within the sport to like critique and realize what's a good performance, right? Like, if somebody goes head to head with Killian and edges him out the line, like, sure, they're gonna go nuts. They're gonna think it's the greatest thing ever, right? But if Killian's in the same race and for some reason, like I don't know, Killian gets sick halfway through and drops out, and that guy goes on and runs, and he could run an amazing time. But if there isn't like a superstar close behind him, yeah, it's easy for people to kind of be like, if they don't have a knowledge of the course and what's a good time and the other competitors in the event, like it's kind of easy to be like, well, they won, but I don't know, maybe it wasn't a very good field, or like maybe all the really good guys just dropped out, which is also part of it, right? You have to finish a race
Yeah.
to win a race, right? So if everybody else drops out, like
To some
you
extent,
still,
it's what happened at UTMB this year. I mean,
yeah. But I
then
think in
obviously we know that Song ran, I think, the third fastest time
yeah, I
on
mean
that
the
course.
guys
So
still broke 20 hours, like,
yes,
and I think that was the thing, like we did have some scope there of like, sure, would it have gotten way more attention if Jim would have stayed in and Vincent would have beat him by like, 20 minutes or something? Yeah, that would have been even like people would have been even more wowed. But I think the saving grace for him there was, even though a lot of those big name guys, in the sense that they're big name because they're known in the sport, like you said, you can be one of the best in the sport and not have a big name.
sure.
Um, and but those big name guys, in that sense, a lot of them dropped out. But his saving grace was that he went under 20 hours. And so we had that enough of a history on that course, I think, for people to be like, wow, like that's legit. Like he just went under
Yeah.
20 hours. And some year that might be like 19 hours. You have to be 19 hours for people to have that reaction. But yeah, that is like,
And then, of
it
course, I
helps
think
when.
to some extent it's fair that as fans of the sport, we have our own characters, and we
Mhm.
like we we like certain people just because we know them more than others. And I mean, it's easy to be a fan of Jim Walmsley just because obviously is one of the goats, but I mean, we know something about the man behind the athlete, and that may not be true in other cases where an athlete is less known by their fans, and people don't love it as much, don't love this person as much. So
Yeah. Yeah, there is, we do get drawn to like a story, right? Like,
yeah,
um, I
we
mean, it
have our
happens
own
in,
characters, I guess. So it's
yeah,
fair.
yeah.
It's
I
okay.
mean, it happens in probably almost all sports. Like I watch like, I grew up on the East Coast. I watch a lot of, I love watching football. Like, like, there's always like certain football players that's like, oh man, I love that
Yeah.
guy. And they just carry different vibes.
it's,
Like,
it's not
you
just
know,
performance, it's also
it,
personality and
yeah,
how
it's
they
like,
present themselves. And
yeah,
I think
it's there's
yeah, it's like the the storytelling, or like how a brand, for example, tells the story of an athlete can truly make a big
mhm.
difference in how this person is perceived
Uh-huh.
by the fans, by the audience.
Yeah. Which is kind of interesting, right? It's sort of interesting to think that like in in some ways like I don't know, like I guess it doesn't have to be because you can be mindful of it, but like just sort of the thought that like how you're perceived by the outside world can
Hmm.
kind of be controlled by the be in the hands of the brand that you represent and in the hands of like the media that covers things that you know what I mean? Like they could kind
Yeah,
of paint
that's
this
true.
picture of, and that's where it's like, I think with that's where the challenge comes in of like trying to like keep stuff genuine and
Yeah.
real and not contrived about
Yes.
yourself. But
How do
yeah,
you
it can
how,
really be like, yeah, there can really be like a certain story that's told that, like how many years did we, and maybe at the time it was a genuine story, but like how many of us grew up thinking that like, or how many of us grew up under this perception that like Killian just went out and like goofed off in the like and just like ran around in the mountains like all the time without any real training plan.
Yeah,
You know,
I
like
think
I mean,
most of us, I think.
and maybe that's what he was doing, but whether it's what he was doing or wasn't doing, I feel like that's more or less the line that was portrayed, the story that was told um, through whatever it was back then. I don't even know if it was really Instagram. It might have more just been like YouTube videos. Um, and then nowadays, you and I have a lot of respect for Killian, and I think now he seems well. You know, you never. I guess you never really know, but he certainly seems to share some detailed information now about like how he I guess if you go on his like, there's actually a lot of stuff out there. Like if you, I guess he has that like website with all his like Excel
Yeah, and
sheets and stuff, and
super interesting.
you can actually see a lot of his stuff. I think,
He's very
um,
public about it.
and you're
Yeah. I
yeah, and you're
mean,
like
he's made it no secret. But I do
yeah,
think his training has changed a lot over the years. And
yeah, and it
I mean,
could
the
be that
story that
like
he was just out in the mountains running and exploring is maybe not super accurate, but
and it also could have been accurate for a time in his life,
yeah, for a time, but not,
or
no, it's
or it
not just
also
that. It's not that he
or it
didn't
also
train or he wasn't intentional about his own
yeah.
training and approach to racing.
Yeah.
But
Or it also could have been that like there was an element of truth to it that like he was training seriously and with workouts and very calculated, but in that there was also this spirit of like playing in the
yeah,
mountains and that like because you could do an interval workout in the mountains and view it as like play, you know. So yeah, and
but
I
he's
don't
also
bring
grown
it
a lot and
up to
improved a lot compared to
yeah.
back in the days, you know. So, I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
one of the most interesting things about Killian is that he's constantly improving, like year after year, despite his
It's crazy.
37. It's crazy. And
Like
like the
His
Killian of
Sierras and all.
2015 is not the Killian of 2024, and the Killian of 2024 is a much better athlete, much better
I
athlete than
I
in
said
2015.
I'm making myself a bit vulnerable with this statement, but because I don't really know all the statistics, but I generally feel like yeah, the like 2015 or 2012 or whatever Killian would have got his who we thought was like untouchable and amazing would have got his clock cleaned
Yeah.
by well one by the 2024 Killian and also by a lot of other people in the sport
Oh yeah,
because it's just advanced so
for
much.
sure.
But it's a credit to him of that he still leads the times. Like
Yeah.
the times have changed and he still leads them. Like 10, 12, 14 years later, he's still the one leading the charge. So, you know, he's being pushed by others now, but yeah, it's pretty amazing. And
He's
I
been
don't bring
smart.
that
He's
stuff.
been very intentional about his
Yeah.
own choices regarding training and racing.
Uh-huh.
Is very knowledgeable. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's always super inspiring in the approach that he has
Yeah.
to the sport in general, not just training and racing, but even beyond, and how he's able to combine together, you know, races, but also projects like Alpine Connection, for example, and
Yeah.
what what is required to put together the project, the effort, the
Yeah.
concentration. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So I have a lot
Yeah.
of respect for him.
But anyways, I think I don't bring any of that up to as like a negative to Killian. Just I
Oh
think
no,
I
no,
originally
I know.
I just brought it up as like I forget what we were even talking about, but just that oh, like I guess how the brand and the media can kind of dictate how you're perceived,
Yeah,
and in some ways that's sort of in their hands, and you try to do what you can to like keep it genuine. But yeah, it's just always good to remember that some of the stuff we see or how we perceive things sometimes is actually very far um, from what it actually is. And
I
um,
I
yeah,
have t I have two questions One is related
Yeah.
to performance.
Okay.
How do you define a good performance? And maybe how how could we help people understand what is worth attention and what is less
Mm.
worth from a performance standpoint? Because I think a lot of times, unless you're really into the sport, it's not straightforward to understand whether a performance is a good performance, an athlete is a good athlete, or just to navigate those things.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it's kind of a tough question.
Yeah, it's very broad, so I don't know. You can
Yeah, the easy thing is when there's history, right?
yeah
Like, like like on the track, like it's kind of pretty easy to determine a good performance, right? Like the track is there's not a ton of variables, like maybe you have a windy day once in a while, but like if you have a calm track and a set distance and the whole thing's flat and there's only two turns and everybody runs in the lanes, like, you know what I mean? It's so controlled and we've been doing it for so long, like we've been running track for, forever. We just know like what a good time is. Um,
yeah
so, you can have a good performance in sense of time, like that, oh, we know that's good. Or you can have a good performance in sense of like competition, which is essentially the Olympics. Because the Olympics is like less so about time, generally. Um, in some ways it'd be cool if it was more about time, but like, everybody's going for medals, so it's strategy and competition and who can make the break on the final turn and get to the finish line first, so you can like not set a world record and still have a great performance just by beating everybody else. You could say Cole Hawker's gold medal in the Olympics, was a phenomenal performance. In that he beat out the greats of Josh Kerr and Ingebrigtsen and and a goose, and he was just the guy who finished on top. So yeah, I think you can have it. That's two ways to judge it. But then how do you determine what's a good performance when you don't necessarily have that history of times, or when you don't have that competition? And I think that can be, that's maybe a bit, I don't know, a bit more nuanced. Maybe that's like, this is kind of FKTs, right? Like we actually put a lot of hype around FKTs, and I think FKTs are really cool. Like the concept of it, like fastest person to get from here to there and back, or from the bottom of this to the top of that. You know, it's an awesome thing. And I get why we get excited about it, but at the same time, it's like a lot of the routes and things probably lack the depth of participation basically, or the depth of attempts to really like have like a dialed in performance on them of like, oh, this one's super good. I probably one of the best we have is, and I even sort of hesitate to say this, but is Jim's time across the Grand Canyon and
yeah
back the rim to rim to rim, and I say that partly because I've run it very hard. Like I tried to get it last year. I ran it very hard myself. And it's like, until you do it, like, it's hard to conceptualize, I think, what exactly Jim did that day until you're in that canyon yourself. Um, and yeah, and then this year, with a couple guys, Jack Kunzel, I think never actually went for it. He was thinking about it, and then his body was feeling run down or something, and he bailed, I think. And then
I think Adam Peterman
Adam
announced that
Peter
he's
Adam
gonna try.
yeah, he actually did. He already went. He tried already.
Okay.
Yeah, he you probably didn't see much about it because he didn't have a great day. He was like somewhat like I think he was probably the thing about that record is like I think anybody who tries it, you'll quickly realize how stinking fast Jim ran across the canyon on the way out. It's really fast. So you have to like you have to keep your wits about you when you get because most people will probably be behind pace when they get to the turnaround. And the hope is that you negative split a bit and make time up on Jim coming back. Um, but I didn't really make any time on Jim coming back, and Adam didn't really either. And then he kind of just threw in the towel and hiked out with his girlfriend. But he said he was like sort of in the ballpark on the way over.
Okay.
But yeah, I spoke with Jim about that record, and he's like, and he flat out told me we were hanging out one night, and he's like, I don't know if I forget. He said something to the effect of, I don't know if I'd have the balls anymore to go out as hard as I did in that thing. And then I did it, and it was like, oh, I see what you're talking about, because I think he got to the North Rim like 15 minutes faster than me or something. And I still
Wow.
had to go back across. And then I finished like 15 minutes slower than him. So we covered it. But I also heard that when Jim got there, he like hemmed and hawed and stood around trying to decide if he was going to go back and get the double crossing record. So, anyways, like even with all of Jim's hemming and hawing and stuff, I still just ran like equivalent time coming back across, which his moving time was probably faster than mine because I basically didn't stop and he probably sort of took his time at certain spots. Um, but anyways, yeah, so like, you know, anyways, that's just the thing we face with FKTs too. Like, are they impressive performances? Like, yeah, probably. Like you did that, cool, but I just don't really have much comparison until we get a lot of people doing it. So I don't know. How do you determine it? I think you have to have an understanding of like what they're doing, what it takes to do that, and then see what they did, what was their time, um, and then you just kind of have to analyze that, and that's like the local things in your backyard, right? Like you've got a local route in your backyard you run all the time, and then some dude comes out and sets a crazy fast time, and you're like, oh my goodness, I run that thing all the time, and I know how hard it is to run that fast, and he just ran like 5 minutes faster than me, and you'd be like, that's a good time. But when we're sitting at home on our computers and just looking up race results, it's hard to have that perspective. So I think it really is just like you have to have a knowledge of like
That's why
what the
we
what the course is and like what the history is, and then you can kind of determine, and it could still be an impressive performance for that individual, even if it's not impressive performance, say like universally. But it could be like, like if you never run a 5K in under 21 minutes and you go run a 5K in 20 minutes and 30 seconds, that's an impressive performance. You have the context within the history of yourself, to determine it. But because impressive isn't just dependent on like a global perspective, it can be an individual perspective.
yeah, that's why we need to keep cultivating that knowledge and culture of what performance is and the
Yeah.
history. I think that's one of the reasons why it's important to be a student of the sport, and I think it can really benefit the athletes who want to
Hmm.
achieve, uh, like aim big and achieve big things. Because
Yeah.
the more knowledge you have, the better you can understand, educate yourself, and make choices eventually. So
Well, and that's why competition, we commented earlier, about really early in our chat about like, wanting to be at those competitive events. And that's why competition is so handy, because when you have the competition, it kind of makes up for the lack of
yeah,
knowledge
everything is
of a, of
very
a
clear.
course. You're just like, oh, well, like all the best guys were there, so that's And that's why like it's really fortunate. Um, there's been all this hype about Western states already. And I think there's there's a lot of excitement about David Roche and it's good. Like I've known David for years. We used to race like we're not best. It's not like we're like best of friends talk on the phone every night or anything. But I raced on the Nike Trail team with David many years ago, and so I've known David for quite some time, and he's been a really good runner, for a long time. Like he was on World Championship, that 2014 team in Italy. He was
I
on
met
that World
him in
Championship team.
2015 at the World Championship
Yeah,
in Switzerland. So
yeah,
yeah,
and I think it's cool that we have this fresh excitement around a runner who, even though he's been around for like a long time, to a lot of people he's kind of a new face, or at least in the racing space, because he was in the racing space, then he kind of he kind of sort of, I feel like, not to say hid, but went into his coaching space, was still maybe doing some racing, but we didn't see him like in the same way that we saw him in those other years. And now he, after Leadville and things, people are all excited, almost as if he's like a brand new runner to the scene. Um, and to some people, I guess he is, and to others, we're like, no, he's been here for a while. But anyways, we're really fortunate that he's planning to go to Western States and race, and it's looking like it's hopefully going to be a very competitive year, because we'll hopefully get hopefully get a competitive race with a long history on a set course, and we'll get that, like, sort of some of those, hopefully some of those answers to these questions of like what's a good performance. Because we've seen him race, at Leadville, but I think the next, I don't think he was closely contested from behind. Granted, he got Matt Carpenter's record, which was awesome and impressive, and stood for a long time. Um, but yeah, I think it's just like this is what we want. We want these types of guys then to
this is
end
the
up.
ultimate test.
Yeah, we want all those guys who
Yeah,
popped good races in something, to end up in a race together, so that we can just see, like, okay, how does this all
was the
shake out?
best.
Like, yeah, like, how does Dave Roach compare to Jim Walmsley? How does Jim Walmsley compare to you know Rod, Farvard? How does Rod compare to Killian? Or whoever gets into that race. Um, so, and that's exciting, and I think that, that's a good thing. That's why competition, yeah, getting everybody in the same race
Yeah, getting
is
people
is
on the same starting
is
line is very
is
challenging, but it's very
is
important.
super fun, like, and
Yes,
super good. Um,
that's
and
what
yeah,
makes the sport exciting.
I guess part of the questions of the sport is, how do you make that happen? You know,
Yeah,
um,
that's
and
another
there's different.
chapter.
That's another chapter, because different races have had different strategies, I guess, on how to make that happen. Um, but yeah, and maybe it's not up to the events, maybe it's up to the athletes. But yeah, yeah, competition is good for the sport.
For sure. The second thing that I wanted to ask you based on the first part of our conversation is how do you think people perceive you from the outside and how does that influence the way you do things? Like basically how do you manage expectations and how do you think people view yourself?
Oh, that's a good question. Um,
Because we've talked about how, like, for example, you were talking about how it's kind of scary to think about how brands and media have the power to influence the perception that people have around us. But then how
mhm.
do you see yourself in this situation and based on how you communicate and how you're able to influence people's opinion about you?
Yeah. Yeah, so is the question more how do I view myself or how do I think people view me?
How do you think people view you?
View me. Okay. Well, I'm sure I imagine there's a variety
And
of
that
ways
does that bother you? Like, is it a
people view me.
concern or something that you don't care about?
Well, it's yeah, I mean, it's really easy to feel self-conscious, right? Like everybody, I feel like almost everyone has a tendency to be concerned about how people perceive them. And then if you don't, I guess I don't know, we call you a jerk or something. No, I was just being brash. But you know, um oh man. It makes me think of like I mean, yes, like I do have a self-conscious side of like, oh man, like, you feel like people probably think a certain thing of you and you don't want to be perceived a certain way or you don't want something to come across wrong. Um and it makes me think of like sometimes my girlfriend will like she's right now she's like she's teaching anatomy and physiology at the local college in Bend. She's working as a dietitian at like an assisted living community. She's sometimes helping coach a ultimate frisbee team, a high school team, which she's kind of not doing right now, but she was like a month or so ago, and she's building a house all the same time. So she has this like super, and she was training like pretty serious mileage and running like 50Ks and stuff. Although she's kind of like in her kind of end of her season now. But anyway, she's juggling all this stuff, and she'll be like working on something late at night, and it'll be like maybe like 1 or 2 in the morning, and she'll be like, should I send this text message like or this email to my students right now, like at 2 in the morning? I'm like, sure. I'm like, what's the matter? Like, it's their fault. It's like their problem if they're gonna judge you for sending an email at 2 o'clock in the morning. Like, it's just do it. Like, that's you. You were up at that hour. Just send it. Like, who cares? Like, don't schedule it to go at 7 a.m. so they think you're this like organized, regimented,
Productive person.
do things at like the normal hours of the day. Like we don't need to like push that fake. Like just be you, and if they have a problem with it, like I mean, don't just like be you and like be mean. And if they have a problem with it, that's their problem. Yeah, that's kind of your problem for being mean. But if you're just like doing something harmless, like sending an email at 2 a.m., like whatever. So in some ways, that's my personality in life of like, who cares what they think? Just be yourself and like be a good person. And if they have like a problem with it, then like
It's their problem, it's not
it's
yours.
there. Yeah, like I mean, and that can probably go too far, right? Like,
Yeah,
um,
but
but like yeah, like it's just like I get really guilt tripped when like I feel like I've done something wrong, like if
me too.
but if I don't feel like I've done anything wrong, or like that it wasn't in my control, then I don't feel as guilty about it, um, and so as long as I'm like conducting myself in a good way, if other people decide to have a problem with what I'm doing, then it's yeah,
Their thing.
then that's kind of maybe something that they need to work on more than something I need to work on. Um, so
Totally.
yeah. So I guess in how do people perceive me? Oh boy, I think that generally we as humans tend to be more critical of ourselves than other people are of us. So like I guess like if I get a little injured, if I get injured or something and I haven't raced in a while, or like I haven't finished at the top of a race in a while, there's probably a little bit of like self-consciousness of like, oh, do people think I'm like not very good anymore, or I'm kind of like getting washed up, or on the way out. There can be at least I think a little bit of that thought pattern. But I think I imagine that probably most people like one they're not even paying attention that closely. They'll be like, "Oh, you haven't raced in? Oh, I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know you haven't raced since Transgran Canaria." Like, you know, and two, like, even if they are, they're maybe just like, "Oh no, in my mind, you're like my hero, and you're Joe Crusher, and like, can't wait to see you race again." You know what I mean? And I'm the only one over here being like,
Yeah.
"I wonder if they think I'm washed up." I mean, granted, there's probably someone somewhere who does have those thoughts, but like, I don't think it's like the general
Probably a minority.
consensus.
Yeah.
I think the thing I maybe get a little more concerned about these days, um, is as as I started, I think I ran JFK in 2013. It's now 20. I signed a contract with Nike in 2014, and now I'm now in my, I don't know, however many renewals with the North Face. I'm now in 2014, almost 2025. It's been a lot of years, and I think I'm now in this stage where I get concerned about sounding like the cranky old man. Because the longer I think you're in it, I think the more you experience, kind of the more thoughts you have about it, the more scope of like comparisons you have, the easier it is to be like, well, it didn't used to be like this, or like in the good old, like when we first started, it was so fun, and it was like, and it's easy to just, and then you catch yourself and you're like, oh wait, am I just like, I was like, you're like, wait, when I started the sport, there were guys who talked like this, and they weren't very cool. They just kind of seemed like they didn't want us around,
It's easy to
like,
idealize the past.
and so I think now, like, because you care about the sport and you want to see it go a good direction and you want to see it grow in a positive way, and so you share some critical thoughts sometimes about that,
I
and
do it all the time, probably too much.
yeah, yeah, but I think you do a really good job with it, Fran. Like, I think your voice is like, I think you have a really good voice within the sport, and there's a difference between
Thank
like
you.
being a cranky old man and being like a concerned member of the sport who like thoughtfully shares ideas. And you can also share an idea without being like crucified. You can share an idea in an open-minded way of like, hey, I'm not sure, but this is something I think about, as opposed to like, this is what I've concluded and
No, no, of course.
we need to change it. Like,
I try to be very respectful, but I'm often concerned about
yeah,
at the end of the day, like what is the opinion that what is the impression that I make, especially for people who don't know me personally. Like for someone who
exactly.
knows me personally, yeah, of course they know that I care about the sport and that I have certain values and basically I am the person I am. But
Hmm.
for people who maybe just follow me on social media, what is the impression
Hmm.
that I make? Probably
Yeah.
I shouldn't care, not that much, but then part of me cares and I don't know, it's just it's a hard dynamic.
I I don't know that it's that we like, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Like, where does the role of caring play in that? Like, should we not care? Should we care? I feel like caring is kind of like a gauge, like a compass in a sense, like a gauge, like your ability to care about how you're perceived and stuff and how things are done is kind of like helps keep you on track in a way. But also needing to be like self-confident enough that like when you feel like your intentions are right and you're doing good, that you're not like unnecessarily getting stressed out because a troll on Instagram said something mean,
Yeah, obviously.
so yeah, it's I think at the end of the day you do your best to like, you do the best you can with what you have, and trust that reasonable people will
Understand.
will recognize that and be
Yeah.
understanding. And I think in with like with sport, with media and social media and everything, it can be you're very dynamic and challenging, and it's easy for get people to get fired up. But like I think you kind of do the best you can with what you have, and then you can't at the it's going to take some trust. You can't control everything. So like when I
Yeah.
write things on for I Run Far and things, like sometimes I'm concerned if like, oh man, do I just feel like that old guy who's like, well, it ain't what it used to be, and we need to like protect it and get back to what it was, like
Yeah, for
I
example,
I
the article with the unpopular opinions
oh
and
yeah, yeah.
backlash, that was an
Yeah,
example.
and I usually try to like even when I think when I don't know. I feel like when I shared that one, I tried to do it in a way that was like there was, like some vibe of like,
You set the table,
that
so it was,
yeah, that it's not like this is the truth. This is
yes,
just kind of like because I also think it's helpful sometimes to just acknowledge how what you're thinking. Like people are like, "Oh, you think that too?" "Oh, I also think that." Like, "Oh, that's comforting. Like I'm not alone, even if it's maybe a thought that's like a bit abrasive or whatever." And
a
I
bit
think with that,
uncomfortable.
yeah, I think with that unpopular opinions one, oh, if I remember correctly, I closed it with I was basically like, I'm not really into these super long 200-mile races,
Exactly.
but like, but like
But I
to each
respect
their,
people who do
but
them.
to each their own. And like, here's to like learning to be open-minded and like, and be inspired and like drink. I think I said like drink bigger, bolder cups of tea. Like, that these people are drinking that I'm not, that I don't enjoy yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, but yeah, so I think I guess I still haven't really said how people perceive me. I don't know. I hope they perceive me as someone who cares about the sport and who's passionate about the sport and who just really wants to like do good and do the right thing.
Just try your best.
And I
Yeah.
think that's probably how some people view me. I'm sure maybe some people view me as like, I don't know, a bit old school and resistant to some of the change. And I don't know if anyone views me as entitled or anything, but yeah, those are probably the more like self-conscious worries of like how people might perceive me. They might perceive me as a cranky old man. They might perceive me as entitled. They might perceive me as um protective of my turf of like, oh, I've carved out like a good career here and I don't really want other people in. And I hope that's not what I want. I mean, I do want like I do think there's an importance to having like the realm of athletics be like, we live in an interesting dynamic these days with like the presence of both like athletes and like influencers and the way that brands are deciding to do marketing, and that creates a really interesting landscape of like how do we allocate our dollars to like support sport but also support growth in the business. And do we do it through athletes? Do we do it through influencers? Do we do it through people who are kind of a meld of the two? And there's not necessarily that doesn't necessarily make one right or wrong. But there's just kind of like this evolving space and figuring out how we navigate it. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that
Also,
like influencers are bad or athletes are bad or athletes are
yeah.
good and influencers. It's just like it's very dynamic. And I hope I don't come across as like too like entitled or protective, but just more I was like, I care about the sport and I care about how I do things and I want things to progress in like a healthy way. And I want athletes to be treated well. Like I don't want them to be abused by like brands or organizations. I want them to be like, I don't know, I want sport to be an open and welcoming and like productive space for people. Not this like not just like a cutthroat business. Um, and I want it to be, at the core, I want us to be pushing athletics. Like I want, I want brands to be like, hey, we're here to help you chase your dreams. Um, I have this pet idea lately of like, I because we do the donuts. Um,
Yeah.
we do the donuts out of the bus. And I've had this I talk to my girlfriend about sometimes I have this pet idea. So she's building a house and I'm helping her build it. And right across the street, her neighbor is trying to sell a bus. It's this really cool little bus. And so I see this bus like every day. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should buy that bus and I should build it out into a donut shop. And I was like, I tell her, I was like, kind of all I want to do is I want to start a donut business and I want to just like want to like make generate income with this donut business just so that I can sponsor athletes. But I'm not going to ask them to do anything. Like I'm not going to ask them to post anything. I'm not going to ask them to wear anything. They don't even have to tell anybody they're my athlete. I'm just going to sponsor athletes
That would be awesome.
so that they can chase their goals. And maybe we'll advertise the athletes some for the athletes, not so that they can advertise us, just so that people know about the athletes and or so people maybe know like what their donut money is helping to support. Um, and then we'll just sponsor that. It'll be like an upside down
Exactly.
sponsorship. And instead of signing a deal where they're like, you must post this many times on Instagram, it'll be like, yeah, we'll give you some money and you just try to be the best runner you can be. And that's it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my dream. Because I get like
That is my dream too.
I get conflicted by
If I
all of
ever
this
become rich, I
like
will do that. But I don't think I
yeah,
will become rich.
I get
For sure not
conflicted
with the
by
sport.
I get conflicted by all this like
Yeah, yeah.
this like this meeting point of like advertisement and marketing and sport and how it works and I'm just like I just want to start a business and just sponsor athletes only to be athletes.
All right, Zach. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah, it's been great to catch up with you, and I
Yeah, you
hope
too.
our audience enjoyed what felt like a very personal and honest conversation.
Yeah, hopefully I answered your questions well enough.
You
There were some tough
were,
questions.
yeah, I mean, I didn't plan any questions, so
Okay.
they were my super honest
Yeah.
question that I
Yeah.
had on the moment.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet, friend. And I hope you have a good winter of training.
You too.
I'll look forward to
And
seeing you. So we didn't even talk about what you're thinking for next year, but
well,
I hope I see you somewhere.
well,
So
I'm sure I'll see you somewhere. Good luck
okay.
with your surgery if you do it.
Okay. Yeah, 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 yeah. So yeah, we'll see. So okay, thanks.